So, guys, this is going to be beginner tank build, beginner tank information, and it's all related to the Deadlands patch. I'm just going to go over everything that you need to know as a beginner tank to get started off with your gear, with your skills, all the information that you need to know, just to kind of start off that process of if you are becoming a tank, if you're new to Elder Scrolls, you want to play tank, this is what you need to know. So, first thing is the class that we've chose for a beginner tank. Now, there is a specific reason I've chosen to be a Dragon Knight. And Dragon Knight tanks are typically the most easy to play as a tank. They're the easiest to pick up and play as a beginner. And the main reason for that is the fact that sustain on a Dragon Knight is easier than every other class. And this is because you can stack Magicka recovery, you can spam Magicka skills while blocking to gain back stamina. And that's super important because Magicka can be regenerated while blocking, if you're blocking with a one-handed shield or if you're blocking with a Frost Staff without the Trifocus passive, so you can gain Magicka recovery. When you're blocking, you can't gain stamina recovery as like a standard thing. So if you are permanently blocking as a tank, then obviously you're going to be struggling for sustain because you've got no way of gaining any stamina back, and eventually you'll run out and then your block will drop and then you'll die. So for the Dragon Knight, this is almost not an issue because you're able to gain back resources so easily. So you can just cast a skill that's Magicka based, using the Magicka recovery that you've got and it's still ticking all the time. You can use it and then you can gain back stamina while blocking. That's the first thing. The second thing with a Dragon Knight is the fact when you use your ultimate, that will give you pretty much all of your resources back. So you use your ultimate and you get a burst of resources. So that's another reason why the Dragon Knight is great. The most important thing for tanks at the very start of the game and all the way through is always sustain. So often there'll be tank builds that focus on self-healing. They'll focus on things like healing or damage and things like that. The most important thing that you have to consider as a tank is always sustain. The number one thing is always sustain. Because if you cannot sustain, you cannot stay alive. If you cannot sustain stamina, you cannot sustain block. You can't sustain dodge rolling or breaking free or any of the core functions that you'll need to survive in the game. If you can't sustain your Magicka, you can't self-heal, you can't cast any spells, you can't cast any shields, you can't physically do anything if you've got no resources. So the most important thing in the game, the most important thing for beginner tanks and all tanks is sustain. So that is the thing we kind of try to focus on when we consider making builds, especially for newer players, because newer players will often block more often, they'll often overcast skills, they'll often do things that more experienced players won't. So you need to think more on the sustain side when we do that when we're setting up a build. The Dragon Knight also offers so many buffs and debuffs and utilities that other classes don't have, that it just makes them the best choice for like a beginner tank. Now later on in the game, you might want to play other classes. There's nothing wrong with playing a Warden tank. There's nothing wrong playing a Necro tank. Necro tanks are fantastic. Sorcerer tanks, very good. Nightblade tanks and Templar tanks, not so great. But all tanks have got a place depending on your group or what sort of content you're trying to do and how experienced you are as a player. So don't write off every other class. This is purely just the fact that if you want to get into tanking and you're a new player, the Dragon Knight is the easiest to learn tanking on. And it provides the most use and the easiest to obtain utilities. But every class can tank. You can tank on every single class. So this isn't me writing off anything else. It just means for a beginner, you would be better off starting with a Dragon Knight. Okay, the next big thing regarding creating and setting up your first tank is the race of your tank. If you go into any Discord or you ask anybody what race should I be as a tank, you'll get the same kind of response every time. And I kind of disagree with it in a way when we talk about a beginner tank perspective. So people will often say, it doesn't matter what race you choose, pick whatever you want. And that is kind of true to a certain point. because you can play a tank. Again, you can play any class, you can play any race. You absolutely can pick whatever the hell you want. It doesn't make any difference later in the game. But when you first start, it's going to have a huge impact. And you can't tell me otherwise because, again, it comes down to sustain. So there are a couple of different races that will have better sustain options for you as a beginner tank. So the first two choices are going to be Redguard and Argonian. So if you are a new tank, you're a picky DK, you pick your Dragon Knight, and then you're going to want to pick a sustain-based race, because the most difficult thing for tanks, as we just mentioned, is sustain. So the thing you're going to struggle with the most is sustain. If you go ahead and pick something like a Wood Elf tank, if you go ahead and pick something like a High Elf tank, you're going to have issues with your stamina sustain potentially. You are going to have certain issues in terms of building up your stats. You're going to have problems in a range of different areas. So I would always suggest picking either Redguard or Argonian. The reason for that is because they are already part of the base game. So the Redguard, for example, reduces the cost of your weapon abilities by 8%. That's important. You're using like 3, 4, 5 weapon skills. So that's quite a lot of skills that's going to be reduced in cost. Increases max stamina by 2k. So that's the highest amount of max stamina you can gain by a race, is 2k. This offers 2k max stamina. Stamina is your most important resource because it's the thing that you're going to consume the most, because you're going to be blocking because you're a tank. So that's really vital. And then the Adrenaline Rush passive, when you deal damage, you restore 1005 stamina, and it can occur once every 5 seconds. The reason why this is important is that works out at over 12k stamina per minute. So the Redguard kind of gets overlooked quite frequently, up until recently anyway. I've been trying to promote the Redguard quite heavily for new players because it actually provides excellent stamina sustain. 1000 stamina every 5 seconds without doing anything. You just put down Elemental Blockade on the ground with your Frost Staff, and this is going to tick automatically every 5 seconds. So it's absolutely insane. 12k stamina a minute is a lot of stamina to gain. Now, if you don't play a Redguard, you're obviously going to be 12k stamina less a minute if you go as like an Orc, for example. An Orc is a fine class, is a fine race, but you're missing out on all that stamina. So it's quite clear that picking a good race is quite important at the start. The other one is Argonian, and the biggest reason for the Argonian is the fact that they have a potion passive. When you drink a potion, you gain health, magicka, and stamina back on top of the amount that you get from your potion. Now, this might not be as good for beginner players, because I remember when I was a beginner player, I didn't use potions for a very, very long time. I didn't think there was any value in using them. So I don't really know if, like, maybe beginner players might struggle to utilize that passive to its maximum, like, potential. So it would potentially just be better to have your character as a Redguard tank. Other options include Imperial. Now, the Imperial is something that I don't advertise for a beginner player because it's locked behind the pay window. You need to buy it. It's a separate thing. You can't get the Imperial as a base game race. So obviously, the Redguard, the Argonian are kind of above it in that sense. But the Imperial is a very, very good choice. If you do have the Imperial Edition, if you do have the Imperial crown purchase, then obviously use that if you want to, because that is a very, very good option as well. I personally play as my main character is a Dragon Knight Imperial, but if you don't have the Imperial Edition, then go with Redguard. In terms of the attributes that you play with on a tank, now I'm currently not using any champion points because I'm trying to replicate a beginner player with no CP. I've got quite decent resource pools: 37.7k max health, 25.7k stamina, 20.7k magicka. Now, to achieve this, I've got just 64 points into health. And that's going to boost my health up. So, when you build a tank, there are a few things that you need to think of. So, having 70k max health is only going to have a certain level of value. So, you're not going to get a one-shot from certain mechanics that might usually be a one-shot. However, you're also not going to be able to sustain a fight for longer than 3 minutes. So one of the things that you've got to really think about is, You've got to always balance out all stats. It's the only role in the game that has to go with a balanced stat sheet. So Magicka is important because you need Magicka to cast skills. If you don't have Magicka, you can't heal. If you don't have Magicka, you can't shield. You can't cast skills. There are lots and lots of problems if you don't have any Magicka. So you need some Magicka. Max health. You need max health. And you also need to kind of think about what is the absolute minimum amount of health that you need to kind of survive. Most people will kind of say 35k. Now, I think you want to be aiming for sort of 38 to 40k as a minimum. And that's kind of like the safety level. Like, if you're under 40k health, this would easily get to 40k health if we were to slot some champion points. But as I've said already, we haven't got any champion points slotted because we're replicating a 0 CP tank. So we're still hitting a good number. But we would be able to quickly up that a lot higher just by using champion points. Finally, max stamina. Again, really, really important. If you don't have enough stamina, you can't block. You can't break free. You can't dodge roll. The core fundamental abilities that you need to be able to utilize as a tank to survive, you won't be able to do it if you don't have any stamina. So you need to have some level of stamina. Now, the way that I've managed to reach these stats that I've got currently is by using a certain setup of glyphs on my gear. So I've got different glyphs on my gear. We're going to go over the gear in a minute, but I just wanted to kind of show you that I am trying to balance things out. My personal preference of attributes is to make sure that my Magicka is between 20 to 22k, my health is 38 to 40k, and my stamina is anywhere from 25 to 30k plus. There's some builds that I've got where my stamina is actually 33 to 35k, which is more than an actual stamina damage dealer. And that's even still with 40k max health and 25k Magicka, utilizing different things like mythic items and stuff like that. So you really want to have your stats as high as possible, but you need to split those stats out, have a bit of everything. Secondly, the next thing really is Magicka recovery. So when you're blocking with stamina, and you always want to block with stamina on a Dragon Knight. You don't ever really want to block with Magicka because you can gain back stamina very easily with a number of different, there's a few different methods of gaining stamina back. But you do want high Magicka recovery. You want to try and boost that Magicka recovery as high as possible because Magicka recovery is absolutely vital for casting skills. And the most important skill you're ever going to cast is Igneous Shield because it's going to give you a damage shield, gives you group of damage shield, it gives you a boost in healing, and it gives you stamina back every time you cast it. So the more that you can cast that skill, the easier your sustain is going to be. So you need more Magicka recovery to be able to do that. As well as casting everything else. So a lot of your skills are Magicka based as a tank. Most of your skills, in fact, will be Magicka skills on a tank. So you need to have good Magicka recovery to be able to cast more skills. And you want to be casting skills as frequently as you can. You never want to be on full Magicka. You want to be using up that Magicka recovery. You want to be making use of your Magicka recovery by casting skills to make sure you've constantly got things happening. And that's what you need to focus on. Health recovery is not something you need to focus on, especially for a beginner tank. People will often say a range of different things. Health recovery is not important. Health recovery, Magicka recovery, stamina recovery tick every 2 seconds. So getting 500 health every 2 seconds is not very much. When you consider, by getting more Magicka every 2 seconds, you can cast a self-heal, and that self-heal might heal you for 15k. So it doesn't make sense to boost your health recovery instead of your Magicka recovery to then get lesser healing incoming. So let's say we boosted our health recovery to 3k. That means we're getting essentially 1.5k healing every second. Whereas if we were to get 3k Magicka recovery, we could cast a heal, and then that means we can actually gain a 15k heal instead of 3k. So it doesn't really balance out. If you boost in health recovery, it doesn't make sense. You might as well boost your Magicka recovery, cast more Igneous Shields, cast more self-heals. That's going to be a better way to survive than trying to boost health recovery. Having a little bit of health recovery obviously isn't bad because that's going to tick away automatically in the background. You don't really have to worry about it. It's just going to do it by itself. Stamina recovery is absolutely useless for a tank. The only time stamina recovery works is when you're not blocking. So if you are blocking, it's not going to work. So you don't ever put any focus into stamina recovery unless you're running a certain specific setup in a certain trial or something like that. You don't need to worry about it. You do not use stamina recovery at all, because with this build especially, there's going to be no function for it. It's not going to work. It's not going to. You're not going to benefit from it. It's not going to do anything. So do not use stamina recovery. In terms of your weapon, your spell damage, your pen, your critical, you don't need to worry about any of those. You just need to kind of... they don't matter for a tank. They are like damage focused skills. You don't need to worry about them. And then when we get onto resistances, this is the final thing. So these are my base resistances. If we just quickly cast a skill to boost my resistances. So there we go. 25,511 spell resistance, 24,785 physical resistance. Now, resistances are a thing that people focus way too much attention into. The main thing that you need to look at really is resistances are important for unblocked damage. If you are blocking, then resistances are more or less not that valuable. So if you are blocking damage, then you are not going to take very much damage at all. Block mitigation comes into play, damage is reduced. That really makes a huge difference. So blocking is your #1 survival tip for tanking. Unblocked damage, resistances become more effective. But when you're looking at 25k resistances, the difference between 25k and the cap, which is 33k, so let's say you take a huge hit and you're blocking it, the difference might be about 3k damage, which is very minimal for a tank that's going to be sitting on sort of 40k health. Taking 3k more damage is not that big of a deal. For the sake of, you will have to lose areas of your build. You'll have to like lose strength in other areas of your build to reach 33k resistances. So 33k resistances is the cap. You never want to be over 33k. You don't need to hit 33k. Like anywhere from 25 to 30k resistances is absolutely perfect. If you've got more, like you're going to have to literally drop things from other areas of your build. You might have to have less stats or less magicka recovery to be able to boost those resistances higher. You might need to use gear that's not as good because you're trying to boost resistances. Resistances are not worth the time to focus into. If you've got 25k, for a beginner build especially, you're not going to be doing burn strategies in hard mode veteran trials. It's not going to make any difference. So don't focus as much attention into resistances. Stop worrying about resistances, just focus on max stats, magicka recovery, and having a kind of a minimum of around 25k resistances. That is enough to get you through pretty much all content. You'll be able to do normal trials, normal dungeons, arenas. You'll even be able to do vet dungeons, probably most DLCs as well. You don't really need to push those resistances that much higher. It's only really when you're pushing that top tier elite game kind of content that the resistances, when you edge in a little bit more resistance, that will make a little bit of an impact for that real top tier content. Okay, so the next part that I want to just quickly look at is the advanced stats. Now this is where things start to be important. So your advanced stats is really important for you to understand kind of how things are going to work out for you as a tank. The main ones that we want to look at here are block cost. Now you want to have your block cost under 800. Like that means how much resources. So it's going to cost me on this build currently 759 stamina per hit to block. So if I'm getting hit by 10 things, like every single time one of those things hits me, I'm going to lose like 759 stamina. So you want to reduce your block cost down as much as possible. And we've got to get that low. But also there's a point where we have diminishing returns, which means if we stack block cost reduction really high, it stops having an impact. It gets worse and worse and worse the more that we try and stack it. So we have to use a clever way to kind of reduce down our block cost reduction. We're using like sturdy gear. We're using things that can have a big enough impact, and we're not going to lose in other areas of our build. So 759 block cost reduction is probably somewhere around the number to hit. If you're at like 1,200 block cost, you've got a problem because it's going to cost you way too much to block anything. So you really need to look at your block cost then. Try and get it down a bit lower. Try and get it to around that 750 mark. and that's where you want to be at. The other things that are important here are block mitigation. So as you can see, I've got 79% block mitigation. So when I block an attack from an enemy, I'm only going to take 21% of the damage. That's what block mitigation means. So you want to have high block mitigation on a tank. If you've got nothing, if you were wearing no armor, you were wearing nothing, and you were just blocking with a sword and shield, that would give you 50% block mitigation straight off the bat. When we add in different passives, when we add in different champion points, the block mitigation cap is 90%. You cannot get higher than 90% block mitigation. You can have more than 90% normal mitigation. So we've also got to add our resistances on top of this. So what we can do is, by having 25k resistances, 79, let's say 80% block mitigation, we're reducing damage down by a huge amount. So the most important thing is just to make sure you're blocking attacks. If you don't block attacks, obviously you're going to take 80% more damage. And then obviously that's kind of the main thing. Block mitigation is way more important than your resistances and things like that. So just look at block mitigation. You can easily get it to 75%. I'm nearly 80% here. If we added in some more champion points, this would pretty much be at the block mitigation cap of 90%. When we're at 90% block mitigation, we're only taking 10% damage. So if a boss usually hits us for 100k, we've got 90% block mitigation. We're only actually going to get hit by 10k now. So it has a huge impact. This is the most important thing. Take a little look at it. Make sure you check out your advanced stat sheets. This is kind of a thing that got added a couple of patches ago. So make sure you look at it because it is important. It has a lot of important information here. But the main ones are your block cost, your block mitigation. Things like dodge roll cost as well are kind of important, but you don't need to worry about those because you want to use champion points to reduce that dodge roll cost later on when you can. A few little things with the build. So for this, we are going to be using just tri-stat food. This tri-stat food is the food that you get from your daily rewards. So as a tank, we're very, very lucky. Everything that we need is dropped in our daily rewards. Like next reward, 2 crown fortifying meals. These are tri-stat food. It's free. You get them every week. So if you look at this, we've got 2 there, 4 there, 6 there, 8 there. So over the course of a month, we get a stack of tri-stat food. As a tank, we'd like to use tri-stat potions. Guess what? We also get tri-stat potions every single week, every single month. So as a tank, we are kind of treated quite well by the daily rewards because we get food and potions that we can use as a tank. If you're a new player, you can't afford to buy food or potions. You have no way to craft food or potions. You don't even need to worry because you just get them for free. You just need to make sure you log in every day, collect your rewards, and you've got potions and food to use on a tank. So this is really, really important. Make sure you log in every day, especially as a beginner, to make sure you're picking up these rewards because they are important early days when you first start playing so that you can have potions and food to use. In terms of Mundus Stone, as we mentioned before, Magicka is the most important thing for tanks, especially a Dragon Knight tank. Magicka recovery, is the most important thing because we can gain Magicka recovery while blocking, and then we can convert Magicka that we gain into stamina so that we can keep blocking for longer. So the Atronach Mundus Stone, the most important one, it gives us 310 more Magicka recovery. That is the most important thing that you want to aim for. So the purpose of this particular beginner tank build is to provide players with an easy to set up build, and the build is based around like tanking before you've got any gear to use that you've had to farm. So like the first sets of gear that you're going to farm are things like Worm, Ebon, Drake's Rush, like dungeon gear that you can use as a tank to improve your build. But before you get that gear, you've obviously got to wear some actual gear to be able to go into that content, to be able to get that other gear. So this is a beginner tank setup based around easy to access, cheap to get, craftable gear, stuff that you can get your hands on quite simple, quite easy, that's going to give you some benefits as a tank. So let's have a little look. So the first thing is we are going to be using the trainee set. Armor of the trainee. Now you can use this gear in any way that you want. So the pieces that you're going to see, you can mix and match them in different ways. So for example, we've got the trainee set, but you don't have to use it on this particular weapon. You don't have to use an axe. You can use a sword. You can use a dagger. You can use whatever. It doesn't make any difference. It also doesn't matter if you use it on the weapons or if you use it on the jewelry or if you use it on a body piece. You can use it however you want. So just find the cheapest piece, throw it on, and just make use of it. The one-handed weapon, we're on a Dragon Knight tank. Now this is something new with the Deadlands patch. So this is a sustain thing. You want to try and get the trainee or a one-hander. So your one-handed weapon on your front bar, you're going to want this as a charged weapon. And what's going to happen is you're going to put a poison damage enchant with a charged weapon on your one-hander. What happens then is you're going to get a huge amount of incoming stamina. Every time you cast your taunt, every time you cast heroic slash, every time you do a light or a heavy attack, you're going to hit your poison enchant on the enemy. When the enemy then gets poisoned, which is a really, really super high chance, it almost happens every time, as long as the enchant is off cooldown, you'll get 1,000 stamina. And this is thanks to one of the Dragon Knight passives, the combustion passive. So this is fantastic. The poison damage enchant, the charged weapon on your front bar, your one-handed weapon. Any one-handed weapon, that's what you're going to be using. So there we go. Really important for sustain. It's huge. It's a great improvement for this patch. We're using a shield. For this one, I've just got a reinforced shield. The reason why I've got these particular things, so I've got trainee. You can actually get named drops of the trainee set. So you don't like these pieces of gear will already drop in these traits if you get the name drops. Check out the ESO Hub website for more information for specific locations of where to pick up the reinforced trainee shield. But there's a reinforced trainee shield, can be found somewhere from a certain boss, and the same for the charged one-hander. Make sure you go and check out that. But yeah, you're going to want to use a health enchant on the reinforced shield. Ideally, you might want to use a sturdy shield, but I'm trying to avoid you transmuting and changing the trait of your gear here. We're just trying to get standard gear without trait changes. We don't want to trait change anything, because this gear isn't something that you're going to keep forever. You want to get this as cheap as possible. You want to wear it, and then as soon as you get something better, you switch it out. So ideally here, you're going to be looking for the Worm Cult set on your weapons and jewelry, and you're going to replace the trainee set as soon as possible with Worm Cult because it's far superior. Again, we've got an Ice Staff. This is probably the only one that I would trait change, Infused Crusher, and that's going to give you a nice little group buff. So we've got the weapons are all trainee. A one-piece jewelry of trainee as well. We've got a necklace, but you could use a ring. It's just whatever trade it comes in, keep it at that. Try and get a healthy one if you can. And you want to put a bracing enchant on the neck to reduce that block cost down a little bit. And that's going to really help because we're not got a sturdy shield, we want to have the sturdy neck to try and reduce it down a little bit more. Now the reason why we're using a 3-piece of the trainee is because we get basically a huge amount of stats. If you look at this, it's a 3-piece weapons, it's a 3-piece armor set, sorry. It gives you max health, max magicka, max stamina. As I mentioned before, as a tank, the most important thing, really high stats, really high magicka recovery. That is the most important thing, especially for beginner players. So this is a beginner setup. You want to go brace an enchant on one of your jewelry pieces, 3 pieces of trainee somewhere in this build for those huge max stats. The next piece is the agility set. Now the reason I picked up the agility set is because it's nice and cheap as well. I've got the robust jewelry here. Robust or healthy is going to be good. So you just pick up robust or healthy. And the reason why I'm using 2 pieces of this is because this gives us more max stamina. So if you've got robust, use robust. If you get a healthy piece works fine as well. Healthy is probably a little bit cheaper to pick up, but there is absolutely tons and tons of agility jewelry on the store. So get yourself this one. And then we get the 2 pieces of agility, gives us 1691 max stamina. So we get another buff to our max stamina. And then you want to put 2 magicka recovery glyphs on those pieces of jewelry because magicka recovery, again, really super important. We need more magicka to be able to cast more skills. So there we go. On the body pieces, I've got a crafted set, Seducer. Now the reason why I've got this on the body and not on the jewelry is because if I put Seducer on the jewelry materials to upgrade jewelry to purple are super expensive. Whereas this jewelry is already quite cheap to buy, it makes more sense to use these pieces of jewellery. However, if you want to craft, let's say, you want to craft an infused crusher ice staff, and you want to craft a sturdy shield, you want to craft a charged one-hander, you can use Seducer on the weapons if you want, and get some trainee heavy body pieces instead. So you could get a heavy trainee chest. The only problem is that that's not going to come in sturdy. So you can mix and match bits around to get it better, but just do what you want. What we've got here is 3, 4, 5 pieces of Seducer. As I mentioned before, Magicka again. So we get Magicka Recovery, we get Max Magicka, Magicka Recovery, reduces the cost of Magicka abilities by 10%. This is really, really important. Again, this is a beginner setup. You're going to replace this for something like Eben, Yolnacrin, Drake's Rush. So as soon as you can farm some better gear, you replace this set. But for you to get to that point where you've got that gear, you need something to wear. This is a great set to use. You're going to be able to run into dungeons, chains, talons, blockade, igneous shield spam. You're going to be able to get through dungeons very, very easily to get that gear by using this particular gear set. So Seducer is a fantastic beginner tank gear set. And you want it all in sturdy. All sturdy. And for the enchants, I've gone with Magicka and Stamina, as you can see there. So I've got Stamina enchants on the big pieces. So the legs, the head, the chest are classed as big pieces because when you put an enchant on them, it gives you 802 Stamina. When you use an enchant on a small piece, which is the feet, the hands, the waist, the shoulder, that will only give you a small amount. So as you can see here, 324 Max Magicka. So it gets like really, really nerfed down. You don't get a full-size enchant on the small pieces. So we're using Magicka on the small pieces. And there we go, Seducer gear set. On the last 2 pieces, the Engine Guardian. Now, this is the best sustain set in the game. The Engine Guardian set. So again, sturdy. We want everything sturdy. Everything here is sturdy. Absolutely vital to have sturdy. Sturdy is the most important trait. Nothing else really matters. Definitely not at the beginner stage. This is the most important thing. The reason why we use Engine Guardian, the health recovery is negligible. Not really that important. But the 2-item bonus, when you use an ability that costs resources, you have a 25% chance to summon a Dwemer that restores 531 Stamina Magicka or 1,887 health to you every 0.5 seconds for 6 seconds. The reason why you need this on a Dragon Knight tank, the reason why it's worth getting this as soon as possible, join a guild, try and do the pledges when it's Darkshade 2. This drops in Darkshade 2. You need to try and get this as soon as possible. Darkshade 2 is an easy dungeon to do, even on Veteran. It's worth struggling through it to get this monster set. And it's just so important for a Dragon Knight tank. All of our gear is heavy with the 1 light shoulder piece. You can use a 5-1-1, so use a medium helmet if you want. Use a light shoulder with 5 pieces of heavy. You can use 7 heavy if you want. You can use 1 light piece if you want. The difference is very, very small. Having more heavy is going to make you a bit more tanky, but overall it doesn't make that much difference. Having the 1 light piece is actually a tiny bit better for your sustain and doesn't have a huge detrimental impact on your actual ability to tank. So having the 1 light piece is okay. Now, Engine Guardian, amazing set. Now the reason why it's so amazing is, so when we cast an ability that uses resources, so let's just get rid of some stamina. So you just have to cast any skill to proc Engine Guardian. And when it pops out the ground, it'll beam you with a random thing. So there you can see my Magicka is coming in. So because I'm getting Magicka, I'm spamming Igneous Shield, which is giving me stamina back. Now, on a Dragon Knight, one of the benefits to a Dragon Knight is the fact that it doesn't matter what resource you gain. You can convert every resource back into stamina. Stamina is the most important thing, as we mentioned before, in terms of being able to block. You need Magicka Recovery, and you need max stamina. You need to be able to block. You need stamina to block. So if you're on a Dragon Knight and you're wearing the Engine Guardian set, it's like absolutely made for Dragon Knights. Now, if we quickly just slot this 1 skill, and I'll show you what makes this so good. If you're on a Dragon Knight tank, it doesn't matter what resource you get. So let's say, if If we get health, which one is it? So it's stamina. Stamina's perfect. We need stamina. We're getting stamina. So the green beam, we get stamina back. If we get the health, okay, if the health procs, right, we're going to get 1,887 health every half a second. When the health procs from Engine Guardian, what you need to do is you cast balance. So let's say your magicka's low, your stamina's low, and we're at full health. We can use health to convert into magicka, and then magicka into stamina. So no matter what happens, we're always able to convert it back to stamina. So we can use magicka to stamina with Igneous Shield. We can convert health into magicka. So every single time, we can convert some way or another back into our stamina bar to make sure we've always got full stamina, to make sure we're able to keep blocking, we can keep dodge rolling, we can keep breaking free. So it's just absolutely wild, and it's the best monster set in the game in terms of sustaining, especially for a Dragon Knight tank. So that is the gear. Now, if you cannot get all of those gear sets, then just use a different craftable set. So you've got fortified brass would potentially be a set that I would go with, or something like Hissbark, or just any kind of good craftable set that you can just use temporarily. So if you don't want to pick up the trainee set, if you don't have the option of getting the Engine Guardian set yet, maybe you can't get the jewelry, just craft another set. Hissbark, fortified brass, something along those lines is going to give you a nice little boost to your tankiness, and you're going to be able to get through this content. You're going to be able to get through the dungeon content to get the proper gear that you need. But yeah, there we go. That's the gear. That's all the traits and enchants. And we are onto the skills. This is a very standardized bar setup. And the first skill, Pierce Armor, you need this because this is your actual taunt, and it inflicts major and minor breach, which means your damage dealers can do more damage. It's just naturally happening. You have to cast this once every 15 seconds per enemy to keep them aggroed onto you. So you use this skill, the most important skill for tanking, because it is a taunt, and it's very cheap as well, 1,000 stamina. We can already gain 1,000 stamina very easily just by wearing the poison glyph on the charged weapon, casting Igneous Shield, heavy attacking, using potions. So 1,000 stamina is not really much of an issue for us. So this is why we use this skill. Heroic Slash is another skill from the Sword and Board skill line. This is going to inflict minor maim, which reduces the damage that the enemy does by 5%. That's not the reason we use it. The main reason is for the minor heroism that gives us one ultimate every 1.5 seconds for 12 seconds. The reason why we need to get ultimate faster is so we can cast our ultimate, so we can gain all our resources back. So every time we use our ultimate, we're going to gain resources back. So this is important. We need to generate our ultimate faster. This is one of the methods for us doing that. Next skill is Igneous Shield. This is a Dragon Knight skill, and it's probably one of the best skills in the game. If you ever have full magicka, you should be casting Igneous Shield. If you're struggling to stay alive, you should be casting Igneous Shield. If you're struggling for stamina, you should be casting Igneous Shield. Literally, the whole DK revolves around spamming Igneous Shield at every opportunity because it's just so good. You watch me do any content and you'll see me cast Igneous Shield a lot. It's just such a good skill. So we're going to give ourselves a 6k damage shield, 6.6k damage shield. We're going to give our group a 2.6k damage shield. The more health we've got, the more champion points we've got, boosting our shields, the bigger the shield's going to be. One of my builds that I'm running at the moment for Rock Grove hard mode, this is giving me over a 10k damage shield. So this can really skyrocket to a much bigger shield depending on how you set up. But that's its first function. It scales off your max health. Damage shield for you. You also gain Major Mending, which increases your healing done by 16%. So you always cast this before casting your self-heal, which is the next skill, Green Dragon Blood. So when you are low health, you cast Igneous Shield and then Green Dragon Blood, you get a boost to your healing. Green Dragon Blood has to be cast when you're on low health, so you have to be low on health to get the most use out of this. You heal yourself for 33% of your missing health, but it can crit, it can be buffed. The best way of dealing with that, like I say, is you want to cast this under 50% health. Never cast this when you're above 50% unless you're about to take a heavy attack or a heavy mechanic. Leave your health to keep dropping. If you're just getting hit by light attacks and your health is slowly dropping, allow that to happen. Don't be scared of going and dropping a little bit of health, because even when you're on half your health, you've still got 20k health. So don't worry too much when you're at that 50% mark. Let your health drop down a little bit. Hit it when you are on low health. I always try and cast this at under 35%. So when I'm under 35% of my max health, that's when I cast Green Dragon Blood. I always cast Igneous Shield first, then Green Dragon Blood, then I get a really big buffed heal. And I don't do it before that. Now, this is not a skill that you'll spam for healing. So if you've lost 10% of your max health, the most useful thing you can do is cast Igneous Shield, because this effectively gives you, like in this situation with this exact build right at this second, it'd give us a 6,600 damage shield. So if we've lost 6k health, there's no point using Green Dragon Blood to gain back 6k health, because it won't possibly do that. Whereas we can cover ourselves with a damage shield and get stamina back and get a healing buff and a group shield as well. Like, Igneous Shield is like having a heal over time. It's like having a survival skill that you can spam and it gives you loads of stuff. This is your most important skill. And you want to, like I say, you want to cast it as often as physically possible. And cast this more than your actual healing. Like, don't spam heals. Just leave your character with a little bit of health missing, especially when wearing Engine Guardian, especially if you've got a healer. You shouldn't need to worry about your health. You just spam Igneous Shield to get yourself through those moments where you are taking damage. It works out a lot better. On the last skill on this bar, I've got Defensive Stance, but this is a completely flexible slot for whatever skill that you want. So, for example, you could use Cinderstorm. If you wanted to heal over time, you could cast Cinderstorm. That stays on the ground for 18 seconds. It's going to heal you for over 1,100 health per second. And that will be buffed as well by when you cast Igneous Shield, that'll get buffed. When you cast other skills, that'll get buffed. So you could use a skill like Cinderstorm. There's a range of skills that you could use. You could use Molten Weapons for dungeons to buff up your group. And make them do damage faster, because it's unlikely that they're actually going to be using potions in like dungeon groups, especially when you're at beginner level yourself. You could use something like Engulfing Flames for a little group buff, and when you cast that as well, you get Magicka back. You can just use whatever you want. I've slotted Defensive Stance because it's going to reduce our block cost. So it reduces the cost of block and it increases our block mitigation. It's a nice little boost for a beginner. But it's like the first skill I'd remove once something better came along, or once I'd kind of pushed myself to like a more advanced level. So this is a skill you don't need, but it's a nice tiny little buff for yourself to begin with. My front bar ultimate is Shield Discipline. Now, the only reason why is because it's a very cheap ultimate. So 1, 2, 4 ultimate. And what happens is, you want to use this like in an emergency. So let's say all of your team are dead. You can cast this and then resurrect an ally. And your character will still be blocking even though you're not blocking. And you can res your teammates. If you need to gain sustain back quickly, let's say you've got no stamina left and there's a heavy attack about to happen, but you've got this ultimate. You cast your ultimate. It's auto-blocking for you. And you're going to get resources back thanks to your Dragon Knight passives. So you can just get through it that way. You can also, if you are really, really struggling, let's say you've got loads of ads, you've run into an ad pool, there's 5 things hitting you, you've got no stamina left, you're going to die. You cast Shield Discipline. You're auto-blocking. You can then spam Heavy Attack for 2 or 3... You can do 2 or 3 heavy attacks for the same duration of this skill to get back your stamina. So not only will you get the resources back by using this ultimate, but you can also heavy attack 3 times to get pretty much a full stamina bar back when you've got this active. And your sword and shield skills will also be free while using this ultimate. So if you want to recast your taunt for free while this is active, you can. You can recast your heroic slash, which is double the cost of your taunt, for free. So this is a nice skill to have for an emergency. On the back bar, we've got an ice staff, as mentioned before. We're going to be using Inner Rage, and this is a range taunt. Now, this is a 28 meter range, which is why you're going to use it. There's another option with your Destruction Staff skill line, and that's to use Destructive Touch morphed to Destructive Clench, Frost Clench. This is actually a taunt as well, so Frost Clench is a taunt, but it's got 15 meter radius, so it's much shorter radius. You also don't want to use this for ad pulls in dungeon content or trials or arenas, because Frost Clench actually immobilizes enemies. So when you use it on a ranged enemy, it will freeze that enemy in place away from where you're stood. That is the last thing you want to do as a tank, because the idea for tanking is to pull everything in, make a stack, keep it in place, and then your group can kill it faster. If you've got enemies spread out all around the room, it's going to take a lot longer to kill them. It means that you're going to be blocking for longer and having to deal with them for longer and taunt them for longer. You're going to run out of sustain. So it's in your best interest to get everything pulled in, kept in place, and killed faster, so that we end the fights faster. That is the whole point. That's what tanking. You buff your group to end fights faster. That benefits you as a tank. So you want to be using Inner Rage most of the time. You could switch out Inner Rage and put on Frost Clench for boss fights, because in a boss fight, there's not usually that many ads. And if there are ads, they don't really need to be stacked in the same kind of way as they do during ad pulls. So you can mix and match. I personally do like to switch between the two. So for ad pulls, I'll use Inner Rage. For boss fights, I'll switch to Destructive Clench or Frost Clench. The next skill is Choking Talons. Really important skill. This is a root skill. So you pull enemies into you, and then you activate this when they're all close by, and it will hold them in place. That's really kind of important for doing like dungeon content when you're trying to farm your tank gear early on. When you're trying to get through that sort of content, you want to pull things in and root it. This is going to immobilize enemies in place. And the good thing is, with the Dragon Knight skills, you can chain enemies in, and then you can use Choking Talons, and they both work. So you can chain enemies, then use Choking Talons, and that they both work back to back. Other classes don't have that option. So some classes have a fear skill. If you try and chain an enemy, then fear them, it doesn't work because of crowd control immunity. You don't get crowd control immunity with chains and talons. So it works really nicely. You can chain them in, talons them, then crowd control immunity comes into play. So it's much, much nicer to do it that sort of way. So talon's vital. It also provides a nice little synergy for your group that does flame damage. It also does a area of effect minor maim, so it reduces the damage of ads by 5%. You can even cast this on you can cast this on bosses and elite enemies, and it won't root them in place, but it will still inflict the minor maim. Okay, next skill is Blockade of Frost. This is how you maintain your enchant on your Frost Staff. So we've got an Infused Crusher. It's very important to use this skill because you can't maintain your Crusher enchant without putting this down on the ground. You've also got to remember that we are a red guard, and we're going to get 12k stamina per minute just by you having this on the floor. So as long as this is on the ground hitting an enemy, you're going to gain 12k stamina back. And this costs Magicka. So we've got a Magicka skill that can give us stamina back like over a long period of time. It's a 14-second skill. It's going to cause damage constantly. Enemies can get chilled and immobilized inside of it. It provides a projectile shield, so you can cast it and it puts a shield around you and your allies, and if they're getting shot by archers or mages from range, they will actually get protected against that because of the shield that they're getting from this. And one of the passives as well, in the destruction skill line, will give you Magicka back when that shield gets consumed. So again, another use. So yeah, really important skill. As a beginner tank, this would be like one of the first things. So once you've mastered taunting, sustaining and survival, this is probably the first group buff, or debuff should we say, that you want to focus on. Keeping this down on the ground 100% of a fight is really, really important. It provides that Crusher enchant, which is really important for your group. This is probably the first major kind of group-based buff that I would focus on as a tank. So if you are new, start learning to keep this on the ground, if nothing else. So you want to keep enemies taunted, you want to make sure you're sustaining, and then you want to make sure that this is active at all times. Next skill, Hardened Armor. So your armor buff. This is the first skill I would replace out of all of the skills that I've got on this. You want to replace this with the Mage's Guild skill Balance. Hardened Armor is just like a temporary skill. So it's going to give you Major Resolve, 6k resistances almost for 20 seconds. It gives you nearly a 5k damage shield, and it does a bit of damage. So it's okay, but the best thing that you can do is drop this. Go and get Mage's Guild level 9 and start to use Equilibrium Balance instead. The reason why you do that, this is a health based skill, so you lose a little bit of health. I've got a video on this on YouTube. It's really easy to use, but you get 3k Magicka every time you cast it, and you get your spell resistance for 30 seconds, your spell and physical resistance, your Major Resolve for 30 seconds. So you want to swap and use this as soon as possible, instead of hardened armor. So hardened armor temporary. Start getting your Mage's Guild leveled up. Switch in balance instead, because balance is far superior. Balance is going to give you so much sustain. 3k magicka every time you spend 5k health. And also, as we said before, if you use balance when you're getting healed by your Engine Guardian monster set, you're then going to get health back from that, which you then convert into magicka, which you can convert into stamina. It all works out lovely. So balance, get it on your bar as soon as you can. Get Mage's Guild leveled up. It is absolutely worth doing as soon as possible. Unrelenting Grip. This is one of the skills, again, that makes Dragon Knight superior to all other classes for tanking, especially for beginners and new players. A magicka-based pull chain skill. It pulls enemies to you. It's a free speed buff if it doesn't chain them, and it gives you the magicka back. It's just so good. So, Unrelenting Grip, very important skill. The fact that it's magicka and you can spam it and you can pull things in, and especially if you've got balance as well, so you can be chaining things in. If you run out of magicka, you quickly cast balance and then you can carry on chaining enemies in again. You chain enemies in, you talons them. That is how you kind of get through dungeon content with lots and lots of ads. Just Unrelenting Grip. Great skill. One of the best skills, well, the best chaining skill in the game by absolute country mile. It's way better than Silverleash. It's way better than Portals. There's nothing that can really compare to how good this is. And then the final skill is Aggressive Horn. Now, some people might not like the fact that I've got a PvP skill on the bar, but it's the most useful skill in terms of an ultimate. Now, it doesn't take that long to get this. You can just do random battlegrounds to obtain this. That is what I'd suggest you do. As you're leveling up as a tank, make sure you're trying to get Aggressive Warhorn and some PvP skills. There are some very useful PvP skills. So during your leveling process, make sure you're doing random battlegrounds or going into PvP. Fix some walls. Go and fix some walls with some repair kits in PvP. But try and get to support level 4, assault level 4. Get your Aggressive Horn. And this is really good. This is going to give you a buff. You're going to get increased magicka and stamina by 10% for 30 seconds. So it increases your max stats. Excellent. It also gives you group Major Force, which is a damage buff. And that's really good as well. The fact that it costs 250 ultimate also means that you're going to get a ton of resources back every time you cast it. So when you use this, you're pretty much going to go from no resources to full thanks to your DK passives. So that is the final skill. I'm just going to quickly go over the passives. So in terms of a Dragon Knight, we do need to have this combustion passive. So when you apply burning to an enemy, you restore 1000 magicka. When you apply poison to an enemy, you get 1000 stamina. These effects can occur once every 0.5 seconds, individual of each other. So we mentioned before, we're going to use charged poison glyph one-hander, and then you need to have this passive. If you don't have this passive, it's not going to proc. You're not going to get the stamina back. But this is why the combustion passive is important. This is why the poison glyph is important. With that charged one-hander, you're going to get these resources back. In terms of the other skills, you don't need these. If you're not using Engulfing Flames, Engulfing Flames is a good skill, but if you're not using it, then you don't need to really use Warmth. You don't really need to use Searing Heat. And you don't really need to use Whirled in Ruin. You just need to have that combustion passive. The Draconic Power passives. Iron Skin, increase the amount of damage you can block by 10%. So block mitigation. We mentioned block mitigation at the start. Really important. Definitely got to have this. Burning Heart. While a Draconic Power ability is active, healing received is increased by 12%. Well, we're going to be using Green Dragon Blood. So when Green Dragon Blood is used, Green Dragon Blood gives us Minor Vitality, which increases our healing received by 8%. We then also get the Burning Heart proc, which gives us a 12% more healing received. So this is really good for buffing up our healing. So when you're low on health, this is going to come into effect. You definitely want to have that. Elder Dragon increases health recovery. Not that useful, but the increased range of melee attacks is really useful. So when you are tanking bosses, you're able to get a little bit more range sometimes by having this Elder Dragon passive. So that's very useful. Scaled Armor, which is going to increase our physical and spell resistance by 1,650. Must have this because why not? Earth and Hot passive. These are the important ones. This is why Igneous Shield becomes so important, is because of these passives in this particular skill line. Eternal Mountain increases the duration. So yeah, we do want to have that because we want to have a longer duration on our shield in case it doesn't get used. So this lasts for 8 seconds thanks to this passive. Battle Roar passive. When you cast an ultimate, you restore 50 health, 50 magicka, 50 stamina per point of ultimate. So our 250 costing ultimate is going to restore an absolute ton of resources thanks to the Battle Royal passive. This is why this is very important. Battle Royal passive procs thanks to our ultimate. We want to use an expensive ultimate because we want to go from 0 to full. And that is how we're going to achieve it. Is going to by using Warhorn, by using Battle Roar. This is why the DK is superior for a beginner build, because we're able to get our resources back so easily. Mountain's Blessing. This is a group buff for stamina damage dealers. We get minor brutality. It's a stamina damage dealer buff. That's not super important in terms of there's not really many stamina damage dealers out there. But if you are in a stamina group, every time you cast Igneous Shield, you're going to give a stamina based group buff. So that's nice. The main reason you'd use this is for the ulti gain though. If you are in combat, you generate 3 ultimate once every 6 seconds. So when you cast Igneous Shield, you also gain ultimate back. So you can see how insane this skill is. It's given us so many things. And then finally, Helping Hands. When you cast a non-stamina costing Earthen Heart ability, you restore 990 stamina. Again, when we cast Igneous Shield, we're going to gain almost 1,000 stamina back every single time. So 1,000 stamina. 3 ultimate. Like a damage shield for us and our group. Major Mending. There's just so many things that this skill is so useful for. So Igneous Shield, best skill in the game for me. In terms of the other passives, One Hand and Shield passives, you take all of those every single day of the week. In terms of the Destruction Staff, this is really important. People keep asking me about this. The Trifocus passive, you do not want to have on this particular build. If you use the Trifocus passive with the Frost Staff, you're going to be blocking with Magicka, and we don't want to do that because all of our skills cost Magicka almost, so we can't afford to have a Magicka blocking as well as Magicka skills. It doesn't work. Now, we can afford to block with Stamina because we've only got a couple of Stamina skills, and then we can spam Igneous Shield and we can get all our resources back. If you use the Trifocus passive with an Ice Staff as well, your Magicka recovery is turned off, your Stamina recovery is turned on. So it doesn't work. It doesn't work with this build, and it doesn't work most of the time as a Dragon Knight. You would never really use this as a Dragon Knight, in my opinion. I don't like that playstyle. I don't like to waste my Magicka that I need to cast virtually all my skills. Like, if I can't cast skills, I can't stay alive, I can't shield myself, I can't get resources back, I can't do anything. So I don't like the Trifocus passive on a Dragon Knight tank. There are certain classes where I do think it's good, such as the Necro. I do think the Necro using Trifocus is useful, but in this case, the Dragon Knight, I don't think so. All the other passives, you don't need Penetrating Magic, but you can. The rest of them you do want. Ancient Expert means that when you're blocking with your Ice Staff, it's basically the same as using a One Hand and Shield. There's almost no difference. It's almost the same, thanks to the Ancient Knowledge passive, so you need to have it. And finally, like the last few kind of passives that you want to get, Light Armor. If you're wearing a light piece, then take the first 3. Grace. Grace is useful. This one's useful. Magicka Recovery. Spell Warding is okay. Not vital, but it's nice to have them. If you're wearing a medium piece, obviously take the medium ones as well. So you don't need crit damage done or heal. You could take things like this, reduce the cost of your stamina abilities. You could take that. You could take agility. You could take athletics. But again, it's up to you. Heavy armor ones, obviously, you just take all of your heavy armor passives. And then if you've got balance, then you want to take Major Depths, Everlasting Magic, Magicka Controller. You don't need to take the others, but you can if you want. Undaunted skill line, you want to take these for increased max stats. You want to have the max stats. You want to be able to get more resources back when you use a synergy, so definitely take those. And then finally, obviously take all your racial passives. Just always take them no matter what. On the support, if you want, you can use like the barrier ult, and then if you've got like a high enough support level, 2 points of the Magicka Raid passive give you 10% more Magicka recovery back. So if I slot barrier as an ultimate and don't use it, and it's like a safety ultimate, then I'm going to gain some more Magicka recovery. So that's something you can do when you're a bit more advanced. Champion points. I haven't set up with any champion points, guys. I've got like 160 CP's worth of champion points. When you first start inputting your CP, the first thing you have to do, 10 points into Breakfall, 15 points into Wanderer, 10 points into Steadfast Enchantment, and then you need to get the Treasure Hunter passive. That's the first passive you want to go for, and then you need to slot this. Because if you are a new player you obviously need tank gear. To get tank gear, you want to have the treasure hunter passive, because when you open a chest, you want the gear to be better. You want the gear to be a set piece. Take the treasure hunter passive. This is the most important one. Later on, you can get things like rationer, liquid efficiency, steed's blessing, any crafting stuff that you want. Take whatever you want for the green tree, it doesn't matter, but you've got to get this treasure hunter passive for a new tank. Blue CP. Again, like I say, I've not slotted any CP other than the equivalent of a 160 CP tank. The most important thing to go for here is preparation, and then elemental aegis, and then you want to go into hardy. Then start spreading your points between ironclad, duelist rebuff, enduring resolve, and assailable. You want to take everything. So these are all slottable CPs. So you have to slot these on your CP skill bar, and then you also just take everything that is not a slottable. So like tireless discipline, eldritch insight. Later on in the game, you'll also want to take all of these as well, where you're going to get flawless ritual, war mage, all these kinds of things. Red champion points. Now, there are two ways you can prioritize this. So you could, first of all, prioritize max health. So you just put points into boundless vitality from the very start. For me, I went with damage reduction. So 10 points into tireless guardian to unlock this. So I've gone into damage reduction by slotting brace and anchor. You don't have to do this. Like I say, you could take something else. But this is just my preference. So at 160 CP, I'm prioritizing trying to max out brace and anchor. But you could, like I say, just max out your max health, so balance vitality. Or you could try maxing out something like expert evasion for cheap, like a free dodge roll. And then the same thing again. Just take everything here that is going to reduce the cost of stuff. Everything that doesn't need slotting. For a more useful breakdown of champion points, check out the tankclub.com champion point page. That is updated for the Deadlands patch. It's got all of the CP from 160 CP going up in every 100, so 2, 3, 400 plus up to 1,600, and it tells you a breakdown of all the different CP, when it might be used, and kind of what sort of stuff you want to be looking for. So that's the best bet. Go and check out the website for the more optimized CP kind of stuff. Okay, well, I think we've covered most stuff there, guys. We've covered most of the beginner kind of setup for a beginner build. As I've said before, the main priority here, resources, sustain, staying alive. As a beginner tank, your #1 priority, taunting enemies, staying alive. Once you've kind of mastered that, that's when you start to bring in more group buffs, group debuffs. That's when you start doing more things to help your group. I never focus on selfish tanking. This is probably the most selfish tank build you'll ever see from the Tank Club, because this is an absolute beginner build for players that don't have a tank, don't have any CP, don't have any gear. Once you've got gear, the first thing that you want to do with this build is go and get Worm Cult from Vaults of Madness. That is probably the best set that you can go for. Go and get the jewelry, the weapons of the Worm Cult set. Go and get yourself a set of Ebon from Crypt of Hearts. They are the two easiest sets to farm. That's what you want to pick up to start with. And then you can start doing slightly harder content, because you've got Worm, you've got Ebon, you've got some group buffs, but you're actually buffing yourself a hell of a lot with that setup as well. You go into that harder content, and then you can start doing sort of normal trials, getting Yolnakrin, getting Sax Champion. You can start getting things like Drake's Rush. You can start working on picking up all the gear sets. And there's a list of good gear sets as well on the tankclub.com website. If you press on right at the top of the page, tank sets, there's a list, and it tells you the level of importance of each set as well. Another thing that's really important that you could pick up is going into Vatashran Hollows on normal. It's a solo player arena, and the Void Bash set is going to make your life considerably easier. So if you want a really nice build to run in dungeons, you're going to want the Void Bash set. It's really good. I've been using it a lot myself recently. It makes dungeon content very, very easy, because you can stack things. All of a sudden, Chains and Talons isn't required as much, so you've got better sustain because you press one button, everything pulled in. So you want to try and get in there if you can, and just start collecting up your gear. In terms of how to play this build, you just need to maintain everything. So the first thing, obviously, with an enemy, you taunt it, you heroic slash it. Whenever you've got full magicka, you just need to make sure that you cast an Igneous Shield. If your magicka's full, you need to be casting Igneous Shield. You never stand there with full magicka. Once you're taunt and your heroic slash are active, you go into your back bar, you kick down your blockade, and that is kind of the main three things that you do. Taunt, heroic slash, blockade. you want to keep up your armor buff during combat. So always like pre-cast that before you go in. So yeah, every time you go into a fight, buffer, go in, taunt, heroic slash, blockade. That is the first 3 things that you want to do. If you're going into an Adpul fight, the first thing you do in an Adpul fight is you'll walk in, you cast blockade, you'll chain the enemy to you, and once you've chained it, you'll cast your talons to root it in place, and then you just chain all the straggles in. So you just chain around the room, chaining everything in, and then rooting. Once everything's chained, root it. Just root it. Keep down your blockade as well, and there you go. That is literally Adpuls in a nutshell, and that's probably the most beneficial thing that you can do. So that, guys, that is my beginner tank setup for the Deadlands patch. There's going to be I'm going to do some more beginner tank guides over the next few weeks. We're going to open up the tank school soon for players that want a bit more direct kind of information and learning regarding the tank role. That is coming in the new year, so keep an eye out for that if that's something you're interested in. I appreciate you sticking around and watching this. We've been going for a while now, so thank you guys, and I appreciate it. Thank you.